She was expecting that it would be filled with torture devices, like what she'd found in the basement. However, his bedroom was actually quite nice and peaceful. It was almost comforting. She took a few steps back as soon as he entered the room. "Do you want to take a bath first?" He smiled unexpectedly. Bathing? Why were they going to take a bath? Was she going to stay here? Although dumbfounded by his question, she didn't allow herself to show it. After all, she had already gotten what she wanted. "You go first." "All right." With a shrug, Ezra turned around and headed into the bathroom. She exhaled, wanting nothing more than to collapse on the beautiful carpet. What the heck was he trying to do? While she was lost in her thoughts, her phone suddenly rang. As soon as she glanced at her screen, her face darkened. Valeria. The woman was obviously going to cause more trouble for her. Smiling grimly, she picked it up. A roar sounded from the other end of the line. "Letitia, you slut! How dare you show that video? I thought you showed it to me because you wanted to show off." Letitia sneered. "I'm only fulfilling your wishes. Let the whole world know of your talents. You should be thanking me. You bitch. Just you wait. Do you think the Sarandons will let you go? Especially after they found out that you're sleeping with their lifelong rival? They're going to tear you apart." Letitia remained unaffected by her threats. "Instead of worrying about me, I suggest you worry about yourself first. You think that trash like you will last long with the Sarandons? I'd think twice if I were you." Before Valeria could reply, Letitia hung up. The last thing she needed was to speak to her. Her day was already stressful enough. Before meeting Ezra, she had assumed that he really was gay. There weren't many men who'd ward off women that passionately unless they were hiding something, right? But now, she couldn't help but doubt the rumors even more. Were they wrong? While she was flashing back to his actions earlier, the bathroom door opened. He walked out in his silky pajamas. His gaze fell on her. "There's a bathrobe for you. Plus toiletries." He motioned at the bathroom. "Thanks." Struggling to hide her nervousness, she raced into the bathroom. "Why are you acting like this?" Letitia murmured to herself while she was in the bath. "You going to cohabitate anyway in the future? Shouldn't this be natural for you?" As soon as she was finished, she slipped into her bathrobe and stepped out of the bathroom. There, she saw Ezra lying on the bed with a book in his hands. He glanced up at her and patted the wide space on his left side. "Come here." Letitia slowly walked over and stood by the bed. She gazed at his face for a while, watching the way he stared at the pages with deep interest. Seeing as he still hadn't said a word, she mustered up the courage to say, "Mr. Quince." He raised his eyebrows. Her grip on her bathrobe tightened. "What are we going to do next?" "Sleep," he said calmly. "Sleep?" Her heart skipped a beat. How were they going to sleep? In one bed? Before she could even ask, he smiled at her once again. "Would you prefer the lights on or off?" Ezra could feel his lips twitching at the sight of her horrified expression. Did she really not trust him enough? Seeing as she still hadn't spoken, he tilted his head and asked again, "Do you usually sleep with the lights on or off?" "On," Letitia stuttered out. Nodding, he threw the blankets over his body and turned to the side. "Let's sleep with the lights on then," he stated, as if they were just conversing about the weather. There was something about her presence that just felt natural to him. Letitia stared at him for a long moment, her eyes brimming with unspoken emotion. A part of her wanted to ask more, why he'd let her sleep on the same bed as him, why they were breaking his rule, or even why he'd speak to her like this. But she stayed silent. Maybe all of this was a test on his part? She sat down on the corner, glancing at him from time to time, as she waited for his reaction. However, reality seemed to love proving her wrong. When Ezra said that they'd sleep, he really meant it. Letitia gaped at his snuggled-up figure before shaking her head. Although there were false rumors flying around about the man lying right next to her, she could tell one of them was right. Ezra wasn't used to having women around him. It was morning when Letitia finally opened her eyes. The natural light slipped through the thick curtains, highlighting her glowing skin. When she turned to the side, she saw that Ezra had already left. "Mr. Quince said that you can move your luggage in today," the male servant said respectfully, keeping his head bowed at all times. He placed her breakfast plate on the bed and she immediately seated herself up. "Right, thank you." She smiled. Well, if anything, the man wasn't as ruthless as she had thought he'd be. Of course, Letitia was more than ecstatic to move in. After all, if she wanted to use Ezra's power like she planned, she had to get close to him first for everyone to know of their relationship. It was only right that she go along with this. She didn't waste any time as she headed into her apartment at noon to pack the few things she'd be bringing with her. However, as soon as she pushed the door open, the smile on her face faded. She froze, her grip on the door handle tightening as she stared at Shane. "How the hell did you get in?" Upon seeing her, Shane jumped up from the couch and stalked toward her. "Why didn't you come home last night?" he yelled, resisting the urge to follow it up with a series of curses. "Where the hell did you go? Do you know how long I've been waiting?" "I don't know, and I don't care," she snapped. "Besides, haven't you heard? Our engagement is over, isn't it? You have no reason to be updated on my whereabouts. Now, please leave before I call the cops." He grabbed her by the wrist. "You went to see some other man, didn't you?" Letitia's gaze sharpened. "I suggest you watch your words. Mr. Quince isn't just as some other man. In fact, he's more man than you'd ever be," she added bitterly in her thoughts. "Mr. Quince? Do you really think I'd fall for that? The man's, like, seriously gay." Shane snorted disgustedly. "You think you can use him as your excuse? Do you really want to die right now?" She pulled her hand from his grasp. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Again, none of this has anything to do with you." "Ha! Back then, I thought you were so pure. Who would have thought that such a beautiful face could hide such a nasty heart?" Slap! His head jerked to the side. She glowered at him. "Shane, from what I understand, our engagement is already over. Wasn't that what you wanted? To be estranged from me? To be nothing more than strangers?" She gritted her teeth, biting back tears. "And you already got that, didn't you? You don't have any right to stand in my apartment and humiliate me. Now get the hell out." "Did you just hit me?" He had never before been hit in his entire life. He could feel his vision darkening as he grabbed her arm and slammed her against the wall, trapping her and rendering her unable to move. His breath fanned across her face, and she froze. "I don't have the right? Fine, I'll make up for all the times I didn't do anything when I did have that right," he spat out. "I'll show you what a real man can do." Pressing her shoulders up against the wall, he leaned over to kiss her on the lips. Letitia ducked her head. "Let go of me." She struggled to push him away, but it was to no avail. Every time she pushed, he seemed to take it as a sign to grip her even harder. Anxiety rushed through her. "What the hell are you going to do to me?" "What I should have done months ago." Seeing as he couldn't capture her lips, he let go of one of her wrists and grabbed her by the chin, forcing her to face him. As he moved in, Letitia grabbed the flowerpot on the shoe cabinet and, before he could react, smashed it over his head. Shards from the clay pot clattered onto the tiles. Shane's grip loosened, and she used the opportunity to kick him on the leg and break free. She pulled the door open and ran out of her apartment, her chest heaving, unshed tears blurring her vision. The elevator! Her veins still pumping with adrenaline, she raced toward it just as it was about to open. Without slowing to think, she planted her face against another man's chest. Looking up, she saw Ezra's face hovering over hers. A sense of familiarity rushed through her system as her shoulders immediately relaxed. Although the man was still unfamiliar to her, given that they had just met yesterday, there was something about him that made her feel safe. The pounding of her heart slowly dissipated, and the adrenaline drained away. Grabbing his arm, She slid her hand along his waist, hiding behind him. "I'm sorry," she repeated faintly, but she had no intent of moving away from him. However, Ezra no longer felt uncomfortable in her presence. In fact, a part of him even enjoyed the way she had wrapped her arms around him, and the way she fit in his arms so perfectly. Before he could say anything, the elevator doors were pushed open, revealing Shane. His one hand was placed on the elevator doors, holding them open, while the other was on his forehead. At the sight of them, the calmness on Shane's face disappeared, and the atmosphere around them turned vicious and biting. Nobody dared say a word. As soon as Shane had seen Ezra, he could feel his insides tightening. The man actually had come to find Letitia. Wasn't he gay? He glanced at the way Letitia hid behind Ezra and frowned. Could it be that the rumors were wrong? "I never thought that the famous Mr. Quince would come to a place like this," Shane said snidely. Upon hearing the man's sarcastic voice, Letitia immediately straightened her back and edged closer to Ezra's side. Her gaze hardened and her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't going to allow herself to be subjected to him again. "What the hell did you do to her?" Ezra's voice was as cold as ice, enough to— "You think I'm the one to blame for this?" Shane pointed incredulously at the bruise forming on his forehead. "I'm the one who's injured here. I don't know if you know her, but she isn't some damsel in distress." Ezra raised his eyebrows. "I didn't ask you for any comments with regard to my woman." His woman? Shane glanced at Letitia one more time, watching the way Ezra had guarded her. A sneer wormed its way across his face as he rolled his eyes, shaking his head at the pair. Even the sight was enough to make him vomit. "Your woman? What drug did the woman give you to make you think that she's your woman?" Ezra's grip tightened around her waist as he led her out of the elevator. He stepped in front of Shane. Though Shane himself was a tall man, he towered over him. Glancing at them from side to side, their physical appearances were almost incomparable. "I was never the one to prove myself, but there's something about your attitude that ticks me off." Ezra tilted his head arrogantly as if he were talking to just a regular man. "Maybe it's time to give you a quick dose of reality."